Welcome, everyone. Greetings. Welcome to our Movement Chaplaincy Open House. My name is Reverend Joselyn Spence, and I serve as one of the co-convenors for the Chaplain's Peer Learning and Wellness Group. I am also the Director of Mental Health and Wellness for MBA, and I am joined by my co-convenor, Reverend Tiffany Curtis, who co-convenes and does some work with our Chaplain's Peer Learning and Wellness Group for the National Benevolent Association. As we get started, everyone, please do share in the chat where you are joining us from. I think I see somebody, yes, we have New Orleans here, Lawrence, Kansas. Welcome, welcome. I know we have people joining us from all over the country this afternoon, and we're so grateful to have you here with us. A couple of things to note as we get started. You can follow along during this open house using the automated transcription with the AI generated caption. So if you need that, please do look for the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will also have a question and answer period from our featured speaker today at the end of our time, but please feel free to share your comments and your questions as we're going through our time together by putting those in the chat. So a few things about why we are doing this today. In MBA, as a general ministry of the Disciples Church, the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ collaborates with leaders and with health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. And as a part of MBA's community engagement program area, the MBA Peer Learning and Wellness Groups exist to create sacred spaces for peer support, horizontal accompaniment, mutual dialogue, spiritual renewal, and peer-to-peer learning for disciples of Christ leaders around common areas of ministry and/or professional roles, which is our chaplain's peer group who are here today, and we've opened this space up to you all. Our peer learning and wellness groups also exist to support leaders of disciples-related health and social service and justice ministries and connect them in their work across the life of the church, and to create collaborative relationships between the MBA, our nonprofit partners, disciples, ethnic ministries, congregations, regions, general ministries, and ecumenical partners. So today, we are opening up this peer group experience in an open house format to provide an opportunity for other chaplains and ministry leaders to participate in this deep dive of movement chaplaincy and to connect with this community of chaplains and our MBA staff. It is me and Tiffany's hope that after attending this open house, you all, our guests, will feel connected and motivated to engage our MBA programming, as well as apply for our next relevant peer group in 2027, which will be here quicker than we know. I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Tiffany now to introduce our speaker and our topic today.
Thank you. So good to have you all here. Wonderful to be here. And I'm so excited that today's open house is facilitated by Reverend Elizabeth Nguyen, who co-directs the National Bail Fund Network with Community Justice Exchange. She is a Unitarian Universalist community minister and is affiliated with First Parish in Malden, Massachusetts, near where she lives. And she has helped start multiple communities of justice and spirit, including the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network, which is sometimes called BIAN or Bijan, and Sanctuary Boston. She previously supported youth-led social justice education, co-founded an intentional housing cooperative in the Boston area, and has done national faith-based organizing work. And she's going to be sharing with us about her experience with Moment Chaplaincy, which is the work of spiritual accompaniment with social justice movements and social justice movement leaders. And Reverend Elizabeth is going to be sharing with us her experiences as a movement chaplain and leading us in an exploration of examples of spiritual support as part of movements for collective liberation, drawing on wisdom from the movement for Black Lives, Standing Rock, the struggle for a free Palestine, and the fight against deportations, and inviting us all to think about how our skills might fit with the needs of this political moment as the needs of our communities rise. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. And yeah, really grateful to be in the space with folks. And I imagine people have lots moving in your ministries and your own lives. And so just glad to be in the space. Um, Tiffany, thank you for saying lovely things about me. But, I guess I'll just say I do feel grateful for the invitation as a guest, as a Unitarian Universalist, as someone who's um, work could be called chaplaincy, but that's not often the primary framework that I'm using. I do full-time social justice organizing and see that very much as my ministry. So just thank you for the generosity of you're always welcome and naming that I might use words differently than you might and would love to hear questions or curiosities in terms of the different ways that we approach ministry in this moment. Um, and I'll also say that, movement chaplaincy is a phrase that a lot of folks use in a lot of different ways. And everything I'm sharing just comes from my own experience as someone who's been accompanying social justice movements and part of social justice movements as a minister for maybe the past 15 years, but doesn't come from a sort of fixed lineage. So just honoring that there's lots of different language and frameworks and understandings of spiritual leadership and the movements for a more just and equitable world. I am going to share my screen just a little bit so that there's some points of reference for folks who are visual. So, again, there's a lot of ways of thinking about movement chaplaincy, which honestly, I feel very unattached to the specifics of the words. If they're helpful, great. If they get us where we need to go, great. If they don't seem helpful, let them go. Um, so, for if it's helpful, movement chaplaincy, as and I think a lot of folks understand it, is spiritual accompaniment to social movements and their leaders. And when we're talking about social movements, we're really talking about values-based movements, as Tiffany said, for collective liberation. And that's how I understand social movements as movements that have components that are about building public power, that are about structures of governance, that are about non-cooperation and um, disobedience, um, and that are about achieving goals for material change in the realities of people's everyday lives. Um, I totally just made up these three approaches because they resonated with what I have experienced and seen, but they're in no way fixed. Um, I've seen a lot of different people with spiritual training of some kind or who are providing or have skills around spiritual care of some kind show up in social movements in lots of different ways. And probably you all have too. And I would be really curious when we get to the more conversational part to hear from what you have seen be effective or what you have seen be limited. So I have seen what I'm calling an accompaniment approach. And that word obviously has a lot of power and a lot of different histories. But that basically means like I am seeing myself as an accompanier of a particular social movement or group of people. And I'm going alongside them wherever they go, in whatever journeys they are on. And I'm offering my resources, the resources of whatever spiritual or religious tradition I bring into that space. Um, I also have seen what I'm calling here a symbolic approach, where a social movement utilizes the symbol of an ordained religious leader, a clergy person of some kind, or a religious community of some kind, or religious space of some kind to advance strategic goals. So we see this all the time. Here where I live locally, there's a big interfaith clergy march this coming weekend for democracy. And the goal is, to have this powerful visual of many different clergy of many faiths walking from the Lexington Green to the Boston Common. They're not accompanying a specific social movement. They're not being with people who are houseless or people who are being targeted for deportation or students who are afraid of their visas being revoked, or trans people or queer people. They're not accompanying a particular community, but they're trying to use the symbolic and ritual power of their position to move forward social justice goals. And we'll often see, at a press conference or something, it's like a good visual to have interfaith clergy showing that there's support of the faith community. And so that's sort of what I'm thinking about when I think about that. And then the third, which I sort of named the vanguard approach, I don't love that word. So if you have a better one, let me know. But this is the idea that people most impacted and harmed by systems of oppression and state violence often are earliest to flag an emergency. And it takes some time for political parties, larger institutions, mainstream media to come on board with the idea that there's some kind of injustice happening, but that we, as religious leaders of some kind, have an opportunity to be in solidarity as part of that sort of, maybe frontline actually is the better word, as part of that like frontline initial call to solidarity. So I'll talk a little more about that. But because we know that both the technologies and practices of spiritual care and spiritual leadership are often needed in those spaces, and also because we know that it can help shift the window of concern when religious leaders are present in a space. Something can go from a fringe issue or something that people feel like doesn't impact them to something of shared concern that matters for a collective liberation. And we as religious leaders can be part of that shift. There's so many values that could be named, but I'll just share three that feel really at the heart for me. The primary one being relationship. You all could probably say all kinds of powerful theological things about relationship being at the heart, but I think I think specifically with regards to social movements and in a context where um, institutional and formal religious leaders and religious institutions have sometimes had broken histories with communities most oppressed and communities fighting for justice. Centering relationship is even more important. Um, and and I'll say a little more about this, but I think one thing I have seen sometimes is folks wanting to offer skills of spiritual care, chaplaincy, but not actually having a relationship to the movements or the people that they imagine could receive those that expertise. And as we know, without that relationship, there's no way to offer those skills. And sometimes, in my experience, the skills actually have to take a back seat while the relationship can be developed. And then if there's trust and aligned values, there might be space to say, oh, hey, like, what if we had a moment of meditation or prayer or connection with our values before our meeting? Like, would that help these meetings feel more grounded? Or, um, it can feel really intense to be in the streets every day and here are some songs or some somatic practices that could be useful to us. But there's no way to invite those offerings if there's not relationship. Um, I wrote here, serve the community you're called to serve, because I know, at least in my Unitarian Universalist context and tradition, our congregations reflect a different set of demographics than the reality of the United States and definitely of the world. And so part of my journey has been to say, I actually want to be serving people who are impacted by systems of oppression and are fighting for liberation. And that means that I have not served congregations, but have instead been in different social justice ministry roles and been very privileged to find paid work in roles that have allowed me to do that kind of ministry. And I know that's not going to be true for many of us when we look at the debt we have or the bills we have to pay, like, and the roles that are available to us. But I think naming that whoever we are in proximity with is who we are going to most immediately know the spiritual needs of. And if we want to be serving a community that we don't have daily proximity with, we'll need to figure out how to be in community and relationship so that we can begin to know what the spiritual needs might be and the role we can play. And then again, this might not resonate with everyone, but as someone who at sometimes has worked for a religious denomination for the Unitarian Universalist Association, and at other times been affiliated with congregations that could offer things like space and letters on letterhead for all kinds of things. I do think part of what movement chaplaincy can be is bridging the assets and the resources of religion and spiritual life, whether that includes money, space, the sort of gravitas of religious role in service of social movements, and then also communicating back the needs, requests, demands, and vision of social movements to the religious institutions and communities that we're part of. So just, some photos, because photos say a lot. Tiffany mentioned for years I did social justice work with young people from the greater Boston area, and we did educational work around class, race, gender, and sexuality. And it happened to be at a time when there were uprisings around the murder of Black people by police, and the young people wanted to be in the streets. And they wanted to be in the streets often till very late at night. And I think those experiences, those nights in the streets with young people, really for me illustrated two of the things I mentioned. One, relationship, that there was no way for me to minister to them, even though they would have never used that word, but accompany them, support them, have their backs, help them make meaning of the intense things they were experiencing, reflect back their questions, affirm their insights, provide them with some material support to navigating being at a protest for the first time, navigating a protest with police presence, sometimes with arrests, sometimes with pepper spray. There would be no way to do that if I wasn't in relationship with them. And the entry point into relationship was not an explicitly spiritual one. It was a social justice education program. But that entry point allowed me to then, not in any explicitly religious way, and definitely not with any expectation of being of the same religion, but just be able to offer some of the skills that I had at my disposal and to accompany them. And it would be interesting in those nights that often there would be more clergy at the beginning, and then as the night got later, as the police became more aggressive, there would be fewer and fewer clergy, elected officials, white people, and there would be more and more young people and more violence on the side of the police. And so, part of what I also thought a lot about was just, yeah, like the community, serve the community you serve. And in my role, my priority was the young people of color that I was in relationship with. And in order to serve and support them, I needed to be there. So that's just something I think about, these days. As a mom of a young kid, I'm not staying in the streets till 4 a.m. in the same way, but I hope that someone else is, because there isn't a way to serve the people that we want to serve unless we're there with them. Sharing another photo that was taken outside of the Burlington ICE office here in Massachusetts some years ago, actually under the Biden administration. A group called Asian American Resource Workshop fighting the deportation of one of their members. And I wanted to share this also because of what it makes me think about in terms of relationship. I didn't know the person who was at risk of deportation well, but he was there with his family and had been supported by ARW for some time. And when it came time for him to go into the check-in where he was concerned and his legal team was concerned about his detention, they asked, would you be willing to go with him? And it just made me, was a very tender moment, very scary for the reasons of risk of deportation, but also a very tender moment, again, around showing up and the fact that there's opportunity for chaplaincy, for accompaniment that comes when we show up over and over and over and over, and sometimes in very like humble, mundane ways, but when we then become known to be a trusted person and then are able to support someone in a very difficult moment. And very gratefully, he was not detained that day. And the folks who were leading the protest, I had just gone because it was happening and I cared and happened to be available. And after, as the rally was closing, the folks asked me if I would lead sort of a closing grounding moment, and had folks, feel the ground beneath them and named all the different ground that this person had traveled on as a refugee from Southeast Asia to making a home in Eastern Massachusetts, and all of the ground that people migrate across and make new homes in. And again, not trying to share these stories to be like, oh, wow, like, look at me doing some like magical thing. Like any of us can lead that kind of grounding, but more to say that it's not so much whether we know how to do it, at least in my experience, it's whether we have the relationships that allow us to offer that when it's needed. And again, in that situation, it wasn't something anyone had asked me to do ahead or that I had prepped ahead. It was just what was needed at the time, and there was the relationship for it to be asked for. This is some photos from the resistance at Standing Rock. And I wanted to share this because I think it is an interesting example of organizing within institutional religion. There was a very amazing, still is, Unitarian Universalist minister who was serving the UU congregation near Standing Rock, and had a very strong relationship with the leaders of the resistance camp and the religious leaders there. And she organized our denomination and a number of nearby congregations into funding a number of different efforts, including a chaplain in residence that went and supported the camps on sort of weekly rotation for some time, a yurt space that was physically present at the camp and available for elders. And I was working for the denomination at the time and was the first sort of person from the denomination who went and showed support and supported her as she was navigating the different complex relationships as a minister with a very public presence at Standing Rock. And it was the when I went, it was not considered an official program of the denomination. It was like that fuzzy thing where there was a lot of goodwill, but it wasn't really part of my job. So I think we even like split the cost of the plane ticket. Like it was just like one of those like kind of messy, like I want to do this. The denomination thinks they want to support this, but maybe not quite yet. And I think that's important to share. And it's a kind of version of sort of the vanguard approach of like often our institutions see something that might be values aligned. They're not quite ready themselves to take a leadership role. And there's these little openings where we might be able to bridge a connection or amplify the voice of someone on the ground, in this case, the local UU minister. Um, and then here are some photos from a faith-based action that we did some time ago, where we brought faith leaders to the Southwest, to the border in Arizona to put out water in the desert as an act of humanitarian aid. And the reason I wanted to lift this up is because it was an explicit request out of the legal strategy that was supporting Scott Warren, who is facing charges for his own humanitarian aid work as part of the organization No More Deaths. And I think many things were powerful about it, but what was most powerful in some ways for me was that there was, again, enough relationship and connectivity for the legal strategy of someone facing repression for their humanitarian aid work to be supported by a wider faith community. And part of his defense was RFRA, Religious Freedoms Defense. And so his legal team decided that it would, in fact, be helpful to have religious leaders of many faiths present to put water out in the desert. So that's, again, another example of relationship in this way, being part of the wider ecosystem and trying to play the role as best we can. In this case, very specifically around religious freedoms, which I know a lot of folks are doing right now as well. And then just sharing a few more photos, like this is me like on the mic when I was working with young people. You can see behind me two young people, residents of the city of Cambridge, who decided to escalate a affordable housing campaign by blocking the doors to Cambridge City Hall, along with two adult allies. And so that's just to say, like, sometimes the symbolic thing is the thing that's asked for. They were like, can you wear your collar and get on the mic and say you support us? And it's like, yeah, sometimes that's what's asked for. And then on sort of the flip side, you see a photo from a march near the Plymouth County Jail that cages people for ICE here in Massachusetts. This is also from a few years ago, from during the Biden administration. And this was a march where like there was no need for me to be on the mic. I was not wearing a collar. The ask was literally just to be part of the crew there. It was raining. There were a lot of hecklers who said a lot of really intense things. There were armed undercover police who were present. And what was really needed was like alert, vigilant eyes to support the safety of everyone present and de-escalation. And no one needed any kind of minister to like be on the mic or say a prayer. They just needed like everyone to be alert and looking out for one another, making sure people got home safe and weren't followed by any of the folks who were harassing, making sure people had rain ponchos and making sure that like folks steered clear of the undercover police, like just in some ways like regular stuff, but also like the most human of things in a lot of ways. Um, and then I've said this a little before, but I guess I'll just restate that I really do think um sometimes, and I do this too, like I understand spiritual practices and lineages to be separate from social movements, and we know that that's just not true. Like that's not true of um, anti-colonial movements across the globe. That's not true of peasant movements for land sovereignty. That's definitely not true of indigenous movements for sovereignty. There are both histories of organized religion playing counter organizing or um, serving as obstacles, institutional religion supporting social movements, and then very much spiritual leaders and practices and traditions woven throughout. And you know, one of the things I often think about with movement chaplaincy is in any community that is part of the struggle for liberation, if you ask people like, who do you go to if there's a conflict? Or who do you go to when you're really struggling? Or who do you go to when you think it's just hopeless? People will tell you people. They will tell you the names of the people that people turn to. And what I have often wondered is, you know, how can we resource those people more, regardless of whether they've had access to opportunities to go to seminary or be a board certified chaplain or do chaplaincy training. Um, Communities have their people, and those people also often have skills and wisdom um, that have not necessarily been able to be shared as widely with more structured chaplaincy and religious leadership communities. Um, so just saying that, and again, you know, naming that I think there's just, yeah, there's many. I shared just a few examples from my short experience trying to accompany social movements in different ways, and these are long and ancient interweavings of movements, again, for material change, for the ability of each and every person to have access to a life of well-being where survival and thriving are possible, and the different religious and spiritual practices and traditions that we bring with us. Um, so uh, those are some kind of like structured thoughts, and I have lots more stories to share, but I want to just take a little space now in case there's any immediate questions or responses, or in particular things that folks would want to hear more about, or that folks have a different opinion of, because I would love for this to be more of a conversation. So I'll just make a little space if anyone wants to come off mute or share things in the chat. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I find is just the question of whose voice belongs in the room. And when, you know, for example, going to George Floyd Square this last um, Sunday when it was the anniversary of the death, uh, and seeing, you know, all of the people who were there, all of the activity going on, um, there were people who had the mic who were the ones who were supposed to have it. Um, for me, showing up it wasn't my place to speak to all of that, but to be present. And sometimes being present is what we can do. But also, being able to share on social media, or there are a lot of different ways to be able to I suppose, be present, and also be visible, and also make space for people's voices who need to be heard. And so it was just a really powerful experience this last week to be able to be there with everybody. One of the things that I didn't see on any of the news reports, but there was a walk a mile in their shoes exhibit with all of these pictures with descriptions of different people who had been killed by police or who had died by gunshot. And there was something about them that you might want to get to know about them, not just when and where they died or how they were killed, but what they enjoyed, who was important to them, things like that. And at the bottom of each one of these little pillars, there was a pair of shoes. People were taking the shoes and putting them on and walking and bringing the shoes back. And it was just really powerful to be present while all of that was happening. It felt almost awkward to pull out a phone and try to take pictures because it felt like some sort of sacred space and sacred activity going on. But I'm thinking just sometimes the being present and being engaged and involved isn't always being visible. But anyway, just
Yeah.
I'm rambling at this point, but it was just a powerful experience, and I was thinking about it, kind of knowing that this meeting was coming, and knowing that a lot of churches here in the Minneapolis and St. Paul area have been really active in making sure that space stays available.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, David, and really resonate with the fact that, as you said, sometimes being present and engaged is not about being visible. And I think again, if we're talking about ordained clergy, there can be an emphasis on the visibility of the role. And probably you all as people who are also chaplains more than most clergy understand the significance of presence that is not necessarily about the visibility of the role, but is just pure presence. And thank you for sharing the powerful ritual and memory and memorializing of George Floyd Square. And so much these days I'm like, I hate with every fiber of my being that this happened, whether it was the murder of George or so many ongoing injustices, and the humanity of people's response is really, really sacred. I think, Vivian, did you unmute?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to jump off for a second, but I really appreciated the emphasis you put on being inclusive of the community leaders, because I think there's so much knowledge that comes from that, and so many of them are so well versed. I spent most of my life, I'm in Florida now, I spent most of my life in Alabama region. And I found there the majority of my peers, no fault of their own, had not had the privilege and opportunity to go to seminary at that time when I came into ministry. But when I look at the leadership they provided without the formalized education, it just blows me away. One of the things that I often share now is people ask me, well, how do you like your job? I love what I do, but what I'm doing now, I've been doing for years. Even before I was in a seminary, there are some things There are some things to learn from seminary. I said, and the primary difference now that of what I do that's different from before, at the end of the day, I have to write a note and be held accountable and actually get paid for doing it. And I think sometimes we overlook there, it's so much to be said for the people, what I feel like, with better words, they have boots on the ground. There are people that's there and they're viewed as they are spiritual leaders, but they're also people that's in sync with the community because they're the teachers, they're the firemen, they are the people that are interacting with people on a daily basis and have built those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very, very well said. And I think really resonates with what we just see in community over and over and over. And yeah, I mean, not within the scope of my current life, but I dream of a day where we can figure out as a wider faith community how to more support and I mean to what you said, Vivian, compensate people who are doing that work and doing it day in and day out, and who are the trusted community members that folks already are being resourced by. And I think, Bentley, did you have your hand up at a certain point? And then I see Donna as well.
Hi, thanks for calling on me, Elizabeth. Um, I don't know if this is a question. I apologize. I I think about in classic chaplaincy, we used to talk about dual institutional loyalties, that you have your ordaining body or your community of accountability, your spiritual group, and then you have the context you're serving, that you're and in movement chaplaincy, you almost don't have either in some ways. I mean, you do and you don't. And so I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. And part of my hesitation is like I really appreciated you lifting up that everybody deserves their whole being recognized for their journey of wellness. And don't want to recapitulate my tradition's long history of sort of missionary colonialism and just assume, oh, you want spiritual care from me. So just where is that?
Yeah, those are great questions and ones I think about all the time. I mean, it's yeah, the idea of dual loyalties is really interesting. I often feel like it's way more multiple than dual. Like there's commitments, just thinking of my own self. I have commitments to communities in the greater Boston area who are undocumented and fighting deportations that are longstanding. I also have commitments to a certain group of organizers who have responded to police violence and police brutality over time. That's like another set of commitments. I have people I went to seminary with because I went to seminary in the greater Boston area. I have my ordaining denomination, and then I have the congregation that I am affiliated with as a community minister. I have a group of sort of very wide-ranging interfaith colleagues, and all of those communities matter to me, and they all have different priorities and sometimes values and tension. And I think about that in particular in moments of negotiation. I think, the struggle for a liberated Palestine is definitely an example where there's been, in many moments, values and tension of different kinds and negotiations of all kinds that I'm sure we have maybe witnessed within our own communities or places of work. And I don't know that I have, I mean, you said you don't know if you have a question. I definitely don't have an answer, except that I think it has been helpful for me to feel clear on some sense of prioritization, um, particularly in a given moment. So, for example, for the past, few years, I've been very clear that one of my priorities is to support a group called Muslim Justice League that organizes Muslim folks around progressive values, and to support their executive director. And it means that, if they're doing an action and they ask me to be there, I will prioritize that. I'll prioritize that over a collegial gathering with other Unitarian Universalist ministers. I'll prioritize that over something in the wider immigrant justice space. I am often asking myself the question of, what can I hand off, and what is something that maybe specifically is useful for me to do. And with Muslim Justice League, I know, because of the broken relationships between particularly Muslim progressive leaders and non-Muslim clergy, it's a particular priority for me to support their work. And therefore, I try to prioritize it over even other work that, in accordance with my values, is just as important. But in the ecosystem, there are other folks who can do that, and who can fill that role. In terms of the question about, not assuming that what we have to offer might be the thing that someone else is looking for, I think that's just a true and good, that's just a statement of good ministry. That what we have to offer might not be the thing that someone is looking for. And to what you initially brought up, David, that I think some of where I've seen missed opportunities for movement chaplaincy is where there wasn't the listening and relationship to understand what the request was. And there was instead an assumption of, oh, you want me to speak, or even you want me to visibly be a religious leader. I straight up ask organizers, do you want me to wear a collar? Or do you not want me to wear a collar? And sometimes they say, please, we want visible religious presence. And sometimes they say, no, like our crew is going to be weirded out and think you're anti-queer and whatever. So no, don't wear a collar. And I'm like, great. And again, people have different postures. I know some people are like, these are my vestments and I wear them no matter what. In my approach to ministry, I'm very like functional. I'm just like, what will best get this job done? And so, yeah, I think having the space to actually listen for what the actual invitation is. It's interesting that the ministry residents that we did at Standing Rock, some of the feedback we got from clergy who participated was that they didn't feel that the work that they did while there was the work that they should be doing as clergy, because they got asked to do things like bring a truckload of firewood um, somewhere, or um, there's a lot of drive a group of people who needed to get back to the city, or bring gasoline to an elder who'd run out of gas or something. And it was interesting to hear that feedback, because I was like, well, this is what is being asked, and it's totally fine if you discern that you're not the right person to give it. But I want to have transparency in the reality that, this is what's being asked, and it's okay if you don't want to do it. But let's not pretend that, you know, let's just be real. Like, you don't want to do the thing that's being asked. Okay. Um, in terms of, I think obviously the particular weight of being religious leaders and coming from denominations or institutions that have participated in all kinds of, genocide on this land and all kinds of other things. I almost like, it's not something I say, but it is in my mind and heart in almost every interaction, especially with groups of people that I am in newer relationship with. And it very much colors how I try to lead with responses to whatever the articulated needs are, rather than whatever I think my own offerings might be. And I, yeah, I think, we all sort of figure out what that looks like in different contexts. But I'm definitely always asking the question, like, how can I and how can religion be of most use, rather than what is like my assessment of what needs to happen. Just as another example, Boston is a city where there's often lots of protests, and one of the most concrete things that faith communities can do that's helpful is open their space so that folks can use the restroom, or medics can, have a medic station, or organizers of marches can stash bottles of water or something like that, in different urban houses of worship. It's incredibly useful. It's probably not, I mean, depending on the community, it might not be on the sort of top 5 list of most powerful ministries the community could imagine, but it's the thing that is really, really useful for groups who are, doing the particular public social movement, offering of public protest. So I don't know, not an answer, but some musings. And yeah, I know that I think Donna had to hop off, who had also raised her hand. So yeah, I'm curious if there's anything else that.
Did you raise your hand also?
Oh, great.
I think, or did I imagine that? Sorry.
No, I did, but she
Okay.
answered when she answered Bentley. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Tiffany. Oh, I almost forgot. I did, I imagine you're a crew who has a lot of books and links and resources already, but I'll pop a few in the chat, of things that have been helpful for me in thinking about movement chaplaincy and social justice ministry. This is a piece on accompaniment, uh, by Pancho Arguelles, who has done a lot of different organizing, including accompanying folks who are migrating through Mexico, through the border area, and also was part of an organization for many, many years of immigrants with disabilities in Texas. And he comes from a Catholic background, and is also a dear friend. And just, yeah, I feel like when I am despairing about the usefulness of any of this, he's really good at rooting deep in the history. And then I'll also share some resources. This is from a little bit ago, and I think some of the links are no longer active, but there's still some gems there from the Reverend Jennifer Bailey. Just a collection of different resources around these questions of movement chaplaincy. I would be curious, not to put anyone on the spot, but, just in these times, which I think are, are very intense for many different communities, if anyone has a moment where they feel like they've seen particularly powerful movement chaplaincy or support of a community of people, I am finding it good for my heart and our to lift those up. So if anyone wants to share, welcome that. I'll share one that's happening right now, which is a vigil for the past 24 hours, reading the names of Palestinian children who have died, and here in Cambridge, and seeing a number of clergy of other faiths who are just there providing presence, either reading names themselves or just providing a loving and present witness. So I'm not able to be there, but I'm very glad for those colleagues of mine who are, and I think that is also one of the. I have a my colleague Reverend Ashley Horan, who's also based in the Twin Cities, will often say, like, you just have to take your shifts. Everyone has different shifts, and knowing what your shift is, and our shifts are different when we're caring for elders, caring for kids, when we're providing pastoral presence in a hospital setting or a hospice setting all day long. Like, we all have different shifts, but we all do have a role and a shift to take. And thanks, Debbie, for sharing Reverend Barber's presence at the Capitol building and his presence in ministry. Yeah. I think I'm going to hand it back to Tiffany and Joselyn to close us out, unless there's anything else that folks want to share or offer.
Thank you so much, Reverend Elizabeth, for grounding us today in this understanding of movement chaplaincy through relationship, which you shared so many key things about the importance of relationship building with those communities, grounding us in serving the communities in the specific ways they need, and leveraging institutions and privilege for providing the communities with the resources that they need. And we thank you also for sharing resources with us today. We're so grateful for all that you've shared from your own lived experience in this work of care and justice. And I pray that you will continue to be blessed for all that you do, and that you also find rest in the midst of all of this work of care across communities. I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany for a few other closing pieces. And again, we thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you again so much, Elizabeth. That was just beautiful. And I really am taking a lot away with me. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. And so for those of you who are not in our current chaplains peer group, one of the ways that you can stay informed about our work and stay connected is if you want to sign up for our newsletter. You can sign up at nbacares.org/newsletter. And if you have any questions regarding our work with chaplains as NBA, please feel free to reach out to Joselyn or to me. We're going to put our contact information in the chat for you to reach out to us. And we look forward to seeing you maybe at General Assembly in July, or for our future virtual events. NBA does a lot of amazing webinars, and we're so glad that you were here with us today. So thank you all.